Okay, now we're going to talk about the cells and tissue that makes up your nervous system. So remember way back when we did histology, you looked at a histology slide of nervous tissue and it looked kind of like this, although not quite as detailed. And you had two types of cells that you were responsible for labeling. You've got these big starburst shaped cells. Those are called neurons. They don't all look like this. We'll see in just a minute. And then these much, much smaller, more abundant cells, these little guys, those are called either glial or neuroglial cells. It doesn't really matter which. Textbooks prefer one or the other, but it's fine. So I want to talk about neurons first, and then we'll come back to glial cells. So here is what a neuron might look like, but it also might look like these. So let's talk about what they have in common regardless of how they look. Neurons are, of course, the electrically excitable cells in the nervous system, and they get all of the press in the nervous system. What they can do is they can receive any kind of stimulus. They can receive a light stimulus, a pressure stimulus, a chemical stimulus, and they can convert it into an electrical stimulus, and the electrical stimulus can go like 200 miles an hour through the body. So they are excitable, electrically excitable. For those of you who have had physiology or are taking physiology, it is because they have some special kinds of ion channels on their cell membranes called voltage-gated ion channels. For those of you who haven't had physiology, no worries, you'll learn that later. Okay, the other thing that's special about them is that they can take in information, they send it really quickly, like we said, but they also have these little ET finger looking things, which allows them to cause other cells to have an electrical signal called an action potential. That's what AP stands for. So they are, this is called conductivity because they can make other cells have an electrical signal. Because what they will do is they will actually release neurotransmitters from these little ET fingers at the bottom. Now, they're also really, really persnickety cells. They have a very, very high metabolic rate, almost constant need for oxygen and glucose, but they don't store any. So they are really, really high maintenance cells. They have a really high rate of metabolic rate even when you're sleeping. Your brain is working just about as hard when you're sleeping as it is when you're awake. So they require a constant supply of oxygen, a pretty much constant supply of glucose. They're also really picky about their nutrient. They pretty much like glucose if they can get it. If you force them to burn something else for ATP, they will get mad and you will feel it. The other thing, most neurons, I can't say all of them. We used to say all, and of course what happens in biology when you say all finds an exception. So most neurons are amitotic after fetal development. So that means they have to live as long as you do, right? So 100 years, more than 100 years. I don't know how old the oldest person was, 120, something like that. So they have to live the entire time that you live. Now, they did find a few in the brain that are actually mitotic, but for all practical purposes, assume that your neurons are amitotic. Okay. So now what I want to do is talk about what neurons are actually doing. There's 3 different things that a neuron could be doing. And this is hard for people to understand. So these are called the functional classifications of neurons. What is a neuron doing? Okay, so I'm going to use a simple diagram to show you. So this is showing information in, and then information processed, and then information out. Okay, so this may be she had an itch right here and it went through her spinal cord and then she responded. So this is the spinal cord cross section. This isn't the brain. Please note that the neuron cell bodies though are in gray matter, not white matter, because that's where I told you that they would be. This neuron is weird looking. We'll come back and address why it's weird looking in just a second. But for right now, let's just look at what they are doing. So this is neuron 1, 2, and 3. Let me label them for you. So neuron 1 okay, this one right here, oops, didn't want that color. Neuron 1, neuron 2, neuron 3. Okay, so what are they doing? This one, neuron 1, is sending information toward the central nervous system. So is that afferent or efferent? It is afferent, right? It's sensory. It's sending information toward the central nervous system. That makes it sensory. So this neuron right here Number one is a sensory neuron, and it's never going to do anything else. It's going to be sensory. This neuron 3 down here, neuron 3 is sending information that direction. So is that afferent or efferent if it's sending information away from the central nervous system? And you can tell it's even going to a muscle over there. That is efferent. Okay, so that neuron is efferent. It's never going to be anything else. It's always going to be efferent. And then what about this purple one in the middle, number 2, that we're seeing right here? That is neither afferent nor efferent. It's in the central nervous system, and it's actually just communicating between two other neurons. So 2 is between, 1 and 3. So what this neuron is doing is it's actually communicating between neurons. So its name, it is actually called an interneuron, or an association neuron. So it's inter or between neurons. So what these neurons do is they communicate neuron to neuron. And of course, you are going to find boatloads of interneurons in the central nervous system, both in the brain and in the spinal cord. As a matter of fact, a lot of the gray matter is made up of interneurons. Okay, so with that in mind, so that is functional classifications of neurons. But now I need to address that some neurons look different than you expected them to. Like, why the heck does that one look like that? Okay, so there are actually structural classifications of neurons as well. And I put some figures in your notes, but we've also got figures right here. So listen to how you actually describe these. So the way that you describe these is how many projections do they have sticking off of the cell body? So how many pokey things, how many attachments, how many branches off of the cell body? So this one has, this one has one branch right here, right? One. This one has 1, 2. And this one has a bunch, more than 2. Okay, that one's got more than 2. So when you look at them, you name them by how many poles or attachments they have to the cell body. So this first one with 1 attached to the cell body, that's called a unipolar neuron. Okay. This one, 2 attached to the cell body, that's called a bipolar neuron. And I don't want to count how many, but more than 2, that's called a multipolar neuron. Now, the neurons that you have looked at most frequently and actually are most abundant in the body are the ones that look like this. And that is a what? Is this unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar? This is a multipolar neuron. And then you've got some diagrams here as well. So again, how many things does it have sticking to the cell body? Does it have 1? It's got 1, 2, or more than 2. Unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar. Okay, so one more thing before we go any further is now I want to go back and I want to look at that same figure that we looked at before, this one. And I want to identify each time the structural classification of neuron and the functional classification of neurons. So for each of these, and we're going to label them 1, 2, 3 again, I'm going to ask you the same blasted questions over and over again. So 1, 2, and 3. Since this one's all hooked up, you can tell what the classifications are. So 2 questions for each one. So number 1, what is the structural classification of this neuron? Like how many poles? 1 is unipolar. That's the structural classification. And the functional classification is what it's doing. Its functional classification is what ferent? Afferent. And the other word for afferent is sensory. Good. Okay. Number 2, what is the structural classification of that neuron? It is multipolar. And what is the functional classification? It's not afferent, it's the one that's actually between 2 neurons. So the functional classification is it's an interneuron, also sometimes called association neurons. And last time, same 2 questions. What is the structural classification of number 3? It has a whole bunch of pokey things. It is a multipolar neuron. And what is the functional classification? What afferent is it? It's going toward a muscle, so it is efferent, also called motor. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to know when I ask one thing versus the other and then answer what I asked. So if I ask structural classification, you have to answer structural classification. If I ask functional classification, you have to answer functional classification. So let's challenge you just a little bit before we do the next video. With this one that you're looking at, I can ask you structural and you can know that it's a multipolar neuron, but can you tell what it is functionally? You can't, because you don't see it hooked up to anything. It's not hooked up to a muscle. If it was, it would be an efferent. It's not hooked up to a sensory receptor. If it was, it would be afferent. And you can't see it between two neurons. If it was between two neurons, it would be an interneuron. Okay, so the only one that we really didn't label is these guys right here in our little diagram that we just did. It's just because they're not very common. These bipolar neurons, you don't find them that many places. They're like in the retina of your eye. They just weren't part of the story that we told before. Okay, I will stop there, and then we'll look at a multipolar neuron in detail.